We have a new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and he's historically unqualified. I think that's one of the reasons why they chose him. I think he won because people didn't know him, and there was also fatigue. He got all 220 votes. I hope that at least 3 of them would maybe stand out for principle, but that doesn't happen. So he's incredibly religious. He said, well, if you want to see what I am, just pick up a Bible and read it. So my question is, do you think he was a good choice? Is he qualified? And where does the House go from here?
Well, in terms of actual qualifications under the Constitution, he is qualified. That is the bedrock of the Constitution.
You know that wasn't my question.
First of all, I love the Constitution, Dave. Maybe you don't.
I'm saying qualified experience-wise. Come on.
Well, he served in office for a while, and he led, as I understand it, he led the Republican Study Committee, the RSC, which is what a group of conservative policy wonks. And so he put forward a healthcare policy to expand consumer choice and lower prices that I respect. But I would say to our listeners on this podcast, go listen to him yourself. So I listened, and I had an open mind. I listened to his opening statement, and the very first thing he said was that I want to acknowledge Hakeem Jeffries. That was the first thing he said in his speech. And he said, I want to work across the aisle. And I said to myself, well, we'll see if this actually happens. But I appreciate that he at least put that at the front. You know, the fact that he's acknowledging that it needs to happen. And then also just listening to him directly, because I think so much of what happens, what people say about him, it's not actually listening to actually what he wants to, like, himself directly. So when I listened to his speech, I actually pretty much agreed with almost everything he said. Do I agree with everything he has said off camera or in his past? Absolutely not. But I'm just saying, from his agenda and he's his place in the world, I think he actually, and actually, I know we're running over on this program, so why don't I lead into my question for you, Dave, which is that I actually wanted to ask you about him because I'm going to read you a direct quote from that speech, his opening speech, and he said, this is his quote, "The greatest threat to our national security is our nation's debt. We have a duty to the American people to explain this to them so they understand it well, and we are going to establish a bipartisan debt commission to begin working on this crisis immediately." Close quote. I fell in love with that part of his speech, and I hope, Dave, that you would too. But do you think this actually has any chance? Do you think we could actually get Democrats to care about the debt?
Well, again, forgive me once again for thinking it's a little disingenuous when someone, first of all, he's been in Congress since 2017, so that's not very long. Secondly, he's never even run a committee. Thirdly, he has no real experience in doing what the main job of a speaker is, and that is being someone who's a deal maker and someone who raises money. So again, good luck being Kevin McCarthy. For whatever you want to say about Kevin McCarthy, he at least knew how to do those 2 things. But again, back to your other question about the substance. Talk is cheap, and he is very mild mannered, and that's good. What's the quotes I've heard? Jim Jordan in drag, or Patrick McHenry on the streets, or Jim Jordan in the sheets, or whatever. There's been quite a few clever ones I've heard, but again, I'll just say, all this talk comes out, but then what do we hear? Well, we're going to separate the Ukraine from Israel, and we're going to tie IRS funding to Israel. Excuse me, but are you kidding? Will you please help me out? I understand that these guys want to allow rich billionaires to keep cheating on their taxes, but it was like Charles Grassley saying, the IRS is going to be kicking down doors with AR-15s going after small businesses. I just despise him for saying that. This is updating a superannuated computer system. This is hiring more people so people don't have to wait 2 hours on the phone when they're trying to get to an agent. Why this animus towards the IRS? Obviously, I understand that they need to protect their rich donors who are paying less tax than ever. But again, so, the talk is good, but the walk so far just ain't there. Again, he said he wants to have a resolution that goes through next spring. That's great. Let's hear it. But again, this whole thing about spending, when he was winking and nodding during the most profligate presidency in ever, 1/4 of our debt happened under Donald Trump. So this newfound parsimony is a little hard to swallow. What are your thoughts?
Well, the truth is that CBS News reported that low-income Americans are 5 times as likely to get audited than any other filer, primarily because of the earned income tax credit. And small businesses are more likely to get audited. So he's not speaking, and sure, maybe he adds some rhetorical flourish that isn't whatever, you don't like it, but that is the truth. Small and medium and poor people, and in fact Black people, are actually most likely to be audited. So that's the truth, Dave. And so, and if you look at the public sentiment around all of this also, and you look at actually how they wanted to spend the funding, they didn't want to actually spend it on helping with customer service for the IRS. So
yes, they
I have
did
problems with that. But
I'm sorry, that's not correct. It's hiring more agents, most of them to answer the phone. The computer system is from the 80s. And again, for every $1 the IRS is given, it can collect $3 or $4 extra dollars in taxes. Okay. So, and where is a lot of that money going to come from? You have corporations that are paying no tax. You have a lot of businesses. I mean, you have individuals that are paying very little tax. I think the fairest thing to do, and because most Americans don't begrudge wealth that they think the system is rigged, which it is. And that's part of Donald Trump's success, is that in their eyes, he's sticking his thumb in the sockets of the elites. And I get it. And in some ways, frankly, as David Brooks says, maybe we deserve it. But the bottom line is that if you had a 30% minimum individual tax and a 15% minimum corporate tax, that's a fair tax for anyone to pay. Okay, and that would at least allow people to say, oh, okay, this is fair. It would simplify a lot of tax returns. It would make it a lot easier. But as long as the Republicans have a say, that's not going to happen.
Well, a lot of corporations don't pay tax because they have losses. So you're saying you want to tax revenue instead of losses?
No, that's not it. They also get to fully deduct the cost of options, which I don't think is fair. I think you should be able to do that to a point. But again, 15%, every corporation can pay 15%. I'm not talking about corporations that have losses. I'm talking about corporations that made profits. Amazon paid no income tax. Salesforce paid no income tax. Those are not money-losing companies.
Well, that technically Amazon was. That's why I wasn't paying taxes for most of its life. But I think we're going down a rabbit hole, Dave. It's more about well, to answer though your question, yes. Why is he tying the funding? Number
Just
one,
stick it. It has nothing to do with it. It's like it's like tying getting rid of the individual mandate into that awful Trump tax cut. Stick to the task at hand. That's going to be a non-starter, right? So if you really want to, if you really want to walk the talk, and you can make a good argument for just funding Israel. Okay, I think we need to also fund Ukraine. I think there should be more accountability, but at least that's a decent argument. But throwing this IRS thing in, it's the same old BS. So I haven't seen any indication that anything is going to be different. Plus, you have a guy who is a religious fanatic. He wants to make gay sex illegal again. We're going back to the 50s here. My God,
that's not what he said. In fact, he was asked about that. He was asked about gay marriage by Sean Hannity, and Sean Hannity said, "Are you wanting to repeal gay marriage?" And he said, "No." He said, "It's the law of the land. I'm not going to contest it." So he asked him about his past statements, and he said, whatever is my personal view is different from, he said, I respect the rule of law. So I think, it's interesting because a lot of times people will say, oh, I'm pro-choice or pro-abortion in my private life, but I don't want to move that over into my public life. Well, why not apply that logic? And that's my progressive friends who say that. So they don't want to have that same logic for him, whatever he views. Again, I don't agree with everything he said, but if he has private views and he's not going to put them in the public square, those are his private views. And Democrats like to do it for themselves, but they don't like to do it for Republicans. Also, I will say it is very common in politics, you and I both know, for both sides to tie funding to something else. That's just how it often works. So you can't accuse him of being the only person of ever doing that.
I didn't do that.
I do respect that he is trying to bring some fiscal discipline. So if you don't want it to be the IRS, which look at the American people don't want that funding. So he is actually doing the will of the people. But even if
actually, that's not true either.
Well, no, it's true. I've looked at the polling for this in terms of the people do not want this funding. They don't for the IRS. They're upset. They actually are afraid of being audited because of it.
Well, again, it depends on how you ask the question. If you say, well, the IRS audits more middle class people, blah, blah, do you want it? But if you say the IRS can collect $1 for every $1, it gets $4 more in taxes. But again, all I'm saying is I never said that people don't tie meaningless bills or meaningless legislation or amendments to bills. All I'm saying is that it was a response to your question. You said he really wants to get off on the right foot. Well, this is not the way to do it because he knows that's going to be a non-starter.
I think if Democrats want to expand IRS funding, my question to them then is,
but it was already passed. It's been signed into law.
Yeah, but what he's saying,
it's not like they want to. It's like saying, well, if the Republicans want to have a tax cut from 1917, look, it's already law. 2017, it's already law. So you're just trying to repeal a law that's on the books. This is not a debate about something that hasn't been passed yet, and it's totally irrelevant. So again, yes, I think I've said our national debt is a real worry. Okay, Republicans have created a lot more of it than Democrats. And when a Democrat is in the White House, they could give a rat's patoot about it. So it's a little disingenuous. But yes, do I think we need to address it? Absolutely. And if Michael Johnson wants to put together a bipartisan panel, I think that's a great idea. And I said this before. I despise both Trump and Biden for taking entitlements off the table because discretionary spending is 14% of the budget. Military spending is 12%. That's off the table now. So what? And 76% is mandatory spending. So we're going to have we almost defaulted on the debt over a debate over 14% of the budget. It's ridiculous. It's why our political system is so dysfunctional. So until we put entitlements on, and by the way, some brave senators like Bill Cassidy have said, hey, 2034, these cuts are coming. So it's like the AMCO ad, you can pay me now or you can pay me more later. So we agree on that, but just get a few things passed first, build up some trust. Then you want to come back and revisit the IRS. Then you want to come back and revisit other things. Do it, but you have to build up a little record of working across the aisle. And so far, the walk hasn't equaled the talk. But I'll give you the last word.
Well, unfortunately, the saga of Kevin McCarthy showed what happens when you do reach across the aisle. When you do reach across the aisle, you get crucified by your own party, and the party that you worked across the aisle with doesn't care either. So there's really zero incentive to work across the aisle sadly, in the way Washington is right now. And I'm not hung up on the IRS funding. I mean, I agree with making sure that there are reforms there, but if it's not the IRS, then what about something else? And you raised an idea of, the entitlements. The point is what the speaker's trying to do is he's trying to have some type of actual fiscal discipline instead of putting more billions of dollars in Israel to say that needs to have from cuts somewhere else. So if you don't like the IRS cuts, what else? And that's what I would say to Democrats. I have not seen them provide any sort of alternative. And so I respect the speaker for starting that conversation and starting the negotiation.
All right. I think that's a very good place to leave it. As always, spirited and respectful conversation. And I thank all of you for joining us on Practically Political. It's always so great to have you. I'm Dave Spencer.
And I'm Carrie Sheffield, and we will catch you next time.